So you've been involved in some of Europe's best or most notable tech successes. Currently Spotify, Sumly with Nick Delosio. You are an advisor to one of the world's richest men, Li Ka-shing. All of this, and you haven't finished high school. We'll get to that later. But I want to know, first of all, what it is you do. Because you seem to be everywhere, and yet you have a relative low profile. So what is your job?
I guess the easiest way to explain the title Head of Special Projects, I don't actually like sitting around in offices pretending to be busy. The benefit of that is, if you look at companies today versus 5 or 10 years ago, a typical tech company would start off in Silicon Valley. 3 years later, they'd go, we need to go international, and they'd hire somebody who'd done a summer in France and go, why don't you go run our European operations and put them in London, not realizing that isn't the right way to do it. So some of the stuff which I tend to do, which is where Special Project comes in, is being the eyes and ears for a CEO. If you're a CEO of a fast-growing company, there's only so many hours in the day, and they're all taken up. And you go from being a one-man band with an idea, or one-man woman, or two-man team, a very small team, to building out your product, to actually becoming a manager, because you've got to scale this and you've got to hire the right people. Mm-hmm. Part of the entrepreneurial drive or those risks that you wanted to take no longer can be taken because you're stuck in trying to build this organization. I act as a great support role for CEOs at that stage. I'll give you an example. Spotify is in a number of countries around the world, over 50, but there's 100 and something, 90 countries around the world. Probably, if you take the top 80 countries, and if we're in the top 55 or 56, out of the remaining 24, I have probably already been to most of those countries 2 years ago and built the relationships. I want to touch upon that is a lot of the stuff which I do is relationship building. There's a big difference between relationship building and networking. Right? So I'll go to a country 2 years before Spotify even deploys the first person there and start working out who we need to have relationships with, who we should be hiring, who we should be buying, and it's kind of the forward advanced party for a CEO, and that seems to work very well in tech companies because they want to do everything yesterday, and I can just take so much luggage or baggage from a CEO. So that's one thing, and then the other thing to that would be what makes me qualified to do that is having built, run, and sold multiple businesses. Whilst I may not be an expert at PR, I've probably hired or fired many PR agencies. So again, you take a country like Korea, for example, I could go there, at least I know where to start looking. So it just ends up being a far easier approach that in 2 years later, when the Spotify team lands on the ground, they at least have a warm welcoming and they have a document which states who they need to be talking to.
But how do you know what decisions to make? How do you know what path to take in a situation like that? Because building startups, the advice is famously fail fast. Like try something, if it doesn't work, try something else. Your job is to figure out what will work in advance of that.
Well, you're taking risks, right? You're taking risks. So it's not as if I'm going to go and move to South America for 12 months or for 18 months. I may go and spend a week in a country, and luckily having a great network of people around the world who I've built relationships with, it becomes very easy for me.
So I touched on this in the intro there. You didn't finish school, so you actually left school before 16. Yeah. Is that right?
I did.
Which is amazing, and that's probably a story in itself.
Not if you ask my mum. My mum still wishes I'd turn up one day and go, hey, I'm going back to school to get my GCSEs. So.
Yeah. So that's basically the secret, I guess, for this business school is just stop school and.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Carolyn is going to fire me. Yeah. Okay. So how do you get from a dropout to one of the most successful young entrepreneurs, internet entrepreneurs in London?
I thought about this question long and hard because I knew you were going to answer this, and the truth of it is a lot of pain, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of dreams, a lot of books. You take those four things and you work at. So I grew up in the equivalent of, very working class neighborhood where you're basically stuck there for life. You're not getting out. And it was something which I wasn't willing to accept. So it really is those four things: pain, dreams, books, lack of sleep, and this hunger, right? And that's what keeps you going. So, I used to dream a lot. I still do. Passes the time away. But, when you come from an environment like that, dreams, and, I'm not trying to go philosophical here, but dreams are a very powerful thing, right? Because they allow you to escape reality. So, you can put your mind somewhere that, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to accept what the current situation is. And then along with it is, it's suddenly not going to change. You always got to put the work in. You've got to go through the pain points. And, that includes the sleepless nights and the various mistakes you make along the way. But it was really this hunger and drive of, I'd made this decision at the age of 15 and 9 months or whatever, that this is the path I was going to take. Right? And then there was no going back to that. So I'd already left one path. I didn't want to kind of go, well, I left that and that didn't quite work out, and here I am, 25. Right. So there was no other option. It was either get to where I want to get or die. Simple. That's how I look at it.
So when you put it like that, I can see why you're motivated. So tell me about that first business. How long after leaving school did you decide to launch a business?
So I have to differentiate between ideas and businesses, because I still come up with about 3 ideas a day. And Will, who's sitting there busy on his phone, who works with me, I literally come up with 3 ideas a day, and I'll call the team in, and I'll, put thing right, he's off again, and then about 3 hours later I've forgotten the idea. But some actually end up being businesses. One of the first real business I had, I guess I was 21, 22, was buying second-hand mobile phones. So this is 1994, 1995. Buying second-hand mobile phones in the UK. There used to be a newspaper called Loot, and I basically drive around buying people's broken phones, stay up at night. There's something called back to black, which is used to polish car dashboards. So you take back to black and you use that to polish the phones, because in those days all phones are black. Right? I'd stay up, wait till about 3 o'clock, go to sleep for about 3 hours, and then I'd drive to Stansted Airport and take the 7:55 flight to Dublin, because prices of phones in Dublin were 3 times the price of London. And I was literally one of these salesmen with a little suitcase, and I'd walk up and down the street to the shops selling phones. I'd get paid in cash, and I used to count that cash in the men's toilets at Dublin Airport, and many times I got stopped because I didn't realize they have CCTV, looking at what's this guy doing, like literally putting out notes there. And I would get back on the flight, come back, like land at 7 p.m. and get in the car, not go home, but drive around all day or all evening, buying phones up again. So
that's incredible. So how do you get from that to the internet?
So I've never switched on a computer. I really didn't know much about computers. But late 98, 99, got myself this Olivetti Ecos P100D laptop. I'm like, okay, this looks like fun. And then AOL chat rooms and CompuServe actually before that. So I was like, I need to get into this. And the first company was a domain name company. It was just registering domain names, and that allowed me to understand a bit more about how the internet worked. Second company was actually Europe's first free SMS service. Think of WhatsApp, but like 12 years or 14 years ago. I was just way, way too early.
Wow.
Right? And I managed somehow to launch it on CNN Breakfast News with Becky Anderson in front of 36 million people. I just kind of cold called out of the blue, and this is 2000. I was like, well, you're running a tech company? Yeah, great, come on the show tomorrow morning. I had no media training. I borrowed my brother's suit because I assumed, like, you're going to CNN, you have to wear a suit. It was one size too big for me, and I went and launched it, and it was doing great. And then the crash happened, right? And I lost every penny. I didn't know what, I hadn't taken any funding. I had no idea where Silicon Valley was, and I kid you not, I thought M&A was actually spelled Mike, November, Alpha. I didn't know what mergers and acquisitions were, so there I am, right? And I'm back in square one, but I've had the taste of it, and I'm like, I can't go back to that life. Yeah. And then, you come up with ideas to counteract that, and many businesses later, here we are.
And so, which one was Buy-At? Because that's the one
So,
that
yeah, so
eventually sold to AOL.
Yeah, so this was a consumer finance lead generation company. I'd moved to China after doing a few things, went traveling around the world, got bored, moved to China, learned some Chinese, and okay, I'll start a little business which will make some pocket money so I can stay in China and never have to go back to the UK and work again. And very rapidly realized this was going to be a huge business, and it was never meant to be a huge business. I came back, hired my old team back, and literally 9 months later, we sold to a Buy-At. So we had a company called Lightstate, they had Buy-At, we sold to them, and it was a consumer finance lead generation company, very similar to Money Supermarket. And then 9 months later, Buy-At was bought out by AOL. So I actually had 2 exits. All my life I'd been waiting for like this amazing word, 2 exits, and then the 2 exits came from something which was a total random idea. I never thought it was going to be a big business.
So that was for a reported $100 million or thereabouts. I won't embarrass you by asking how much of that went into your bank account, but I'm imagining it was a fair chunk. What happens when you go from being a kid who's starting out a business to suddenly having a lot of money?
It's a very lonely and depressing place. Right? And I realized, and I genuinely mean this, ever since I was a kid, to me, money was the solution to many problems, right? Poverty, education, etc., etc. So you obsess about, I need to make lots of money, I need to make lots of money. And then you make this money, and then the next day was probably the most depressing day of my life, because I realized the money was very important, right? But it was that hunger and that journey that kept me going. And now suddenly you refresh the bank account and there's lots and lots of zeros there, and you're like, okay, but what do you want me to do? Go and sit in a strategy meeting with some guys at AOL who don't really know what they're doing? And this is actually, it was around this time that I met Daniel Ek, and funnily enough, considering he was only 22 or 23 at the time, he'd actually sold a company at the age of 20 and gone through it. So he'd phone me up going, hey, you depressed yet? And I'm like, kind of. He said, bought a new car yet? And I'm like, looking at one today. He said, oh, you'll get bored of it next week. And this is how our relationship actually started. So even though he was younger than me, he'd gone through it, and he found in me somebody else who could actually relate to this conversation.
Right. So did he have the idea for Spotify at the time? Was that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he'd already, got a small team, him and Martin Lawrence, and they had a small team already up and running out in Sweden.
Okay. So he had built Stardoll before,
Yeah.
right? So Daniel Ek, as I'm sure you all know, is a successful Swedish internet entrepreneur who built Stardoll first, which was basically designing dolls.
Paper dolls online.
Yeah. And actually was not that big of a muso. Wasn't really that crazy about music himself necessarily, but saw that something needed to happen, that people were not as interested in buying CDs anymore, which we could all see. But he had this idea that you could make music free and make it freely available in the way that it was on Napster and those sorts of sites, but get the backing of the music industry.
So I guess what he was trying to achieve was, how do you make a product which is actually better than piracy, legal, and free? Right? 3 big challenges.
But to get the buy-in from the music industry was a huge thing, because they had been fighting piracy, and so much of the record labels diminishing revenues come from physical sales, right? So this meant taking a huge chance. You, in a way, you invested in Spotify, so you weren't just friends with Daniel Ek.
I actually wrote. It's funny. It's my first ever investment, and I went and talked to a lot of professional investors and VCs, and hey, there's this guy who's got this idea, and everyone said to me, don't invest in this company. Like, you're crazy. We've been doing this for 20 years, and we're experts at M&A or M&A, whatever you want to call it. Trust us, we know all about this. Don't touch it with a barge pole. I'm like, well, I'm going to put probably most of my net worth into this company. And, are you crazy? Didn't you hear what you said? And I said, well, I tell you what, I'm not backing a music product. I'm backing an entrepreneur called Daniel Ek. And I want to touch on that. So Daniel used to come over to London, and after a while he's crashing my spare room. And I'd get up at like 3 a.m. to go get some water. And I'd walk past and he's there on his laptop. And I'd wake up at 7 o'clock and you walk past and he's basically asleep with the laptop on him. And you realize, coming back to what I said earlier, this guy's going to succeed or he's going to die. There is no other options. And having been through that, and that hunger that he had, to me, it was the absolute right decision to invest. And it was never done in the sense of, if I invest X, I may get, multiple FX. It was like, here's a guy who's got a huge dream, much bigger than any of my dreams ever were, and I want to back him, and hopefully I'll get to go along for the ride, which I did, which I am.
Yeah. So Spotify still today remains controversial, but I think it definitely is successful, at least in terms of in the eyes of consumers.
When did you last buy a CD? Answer that question.
Actually, you're asking the wrong guy.
You buy CDs?
I bought the Natalie Merchant CD.
Who's Natalie Merchant?
We gotta have this conversation offline. But you know that's a separate conversation because I love music. But I'm a big backer of Spotify. I subscribe to Spotify and I still buy physical CDs. So or actually more than often I buy vinyl. But why do you think Daniel Ek and the rest of you at Spotify were able to convince the record companies to buy into this idea?
You know, it took a long time, right? It was not a walk in the park. So the first license which were granted were in Sweden, small, you know, very developed nation with fast internet. And if you look at the top 10 countries of revenue for music globally, it's probably not in the top 10, you know. And it was a test case. I actually think it was a test case to be able to prove to them, hey, we think this will work. And they're like, okay, you're in a little silo over here in Scandinavia. Most people in LA don't really know the difference between Switzerland, Swedish, Sweden, or Swiss. I kid you not, right? So, you know, you're so isolated because they go to me and say, hey, how's it going in Switzerland? It's like, we're not from Switzerland, we're from Sweden. They're like, yeah, over there somewhere. And then it took off there. Had we tried launching this company in the USA, there was no way this company was going to launch.
Right.
So whilst it was tough for us, it was actually that kind of semi-stealth move, which wasn't deliberate, it just happened that the company was in Sweden, did us a lot of favors.
Okay.
So we started in Sweden, and then it was Norway, and then Finland, and maybe the UK came first, and that's when you started seeing, and there were a lot of things that went in our favor, right? So smartphones came out, broadband, 3G, a lot of things, just the stars aligned in a positive way.
And you had some fairly significant people in Silicon Valley get interested, fall in love with Spotify, and really back it. So including Sean Parker, who of course was the guy, one of the co-creators of Napster, the first president of Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg said he loved Spotify, it was so good, and basically integrated it into Facebook. I understand that you made the initial introduction between Sean Parker and Daniel Ek. That's a historic moment. So tell me about that.
So coming back to the special projects, because it's very relevant, one of my roles was to make sure that the right people in the USA know about Spotify. And it's easy now to be able to email Sean going, hey Sean, how's it going? And he'll answer, but you know, you're a small Swedish company, startup, everyone's trying to reach these people. So there were a few key journalists and influencers who have managed to help get, you know, prior access to us launching.
Right.
And there's a gentleman by the name of Jeff Rosenthal who runs the Summit series, and I managed to get him prior access with approval from Daniel and the team. And he was having a barbecue, and Sean Parker apparently walks in there and was like, hey, where's this music coming from? He's like, well, there's this company called Spotify. And he's like, yeah, I've heard of this, but I can't get an account. They're in Sweden, and it never works, because he was trying to, you know, spoofing IPs and VPN. Anyway, the guy's like, well, hey, have a play around with it. So he plays around with it and, you know, falls in love with it, because he'd now seen how good the product was. And says, oh, could you introduce me to the guy? So Jeff knew me, didn't know Daniel. So he introduced me to Sean. I, in turn, gave Sean a account, because he was somebody we wanted. And then suddenly he started sending these really long emails, like, you know, ever since I was a child, I've waited for this moment. I kid you not, I had no idea who Sean Parker was. Right? And he'd start sending these really, really long emails. And one day I said to Daniel, well, this kind of like psycho dude who just rambles on about, you know, ever since he called it Napster, and this is how it was, what it was meant to be, etc., etc. So I said Sean Parker, and he said, well, don't you know? So, well, I only knew Sean Fanning, right? Because Sean Fanning had the name.
Right.
Anyway, I introduced him to Daniel. The rest is history. He doesn't send me those long emails now. He sends them to Daniel.
I see. Okay. So let's move on to some of the other companies. First, I guess we have to go to Horizons Ventures, right? So Li Ka-shing, as we say, one of the most successful, richest men in the world, is an investor became later an investor in Sumly. So in Nick Delosio's company, Nick is a lovely kid who I think is now 18, but started a company, or actually started designing apps from his home when he was 12.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. And then I think he created Sumly when he was 15, right? So how were you introduced to Nick? Because I know that for a time you were traveling the world with Nick, and then he had the successful exit, which was selling Sumly to Yahoo for a reported $30 million. Pretty good for about a few years' work, but Sumly had not been around that long.
So Mr. Lee and Horizons were early investors or B-round investors in Spotify, and I managed a lot of the investor relations. Got to know him over the years and built up a relationship with them. And they called me up one day and said, hey, we invest in a lot of companies. We found this kid in London. We think it's quite special.
Yeah.
Will you meet him? So I said, can you meet him tomorrow morning? It was Saturday morning. So I'll meet Nick. So Nick turns up and we have this conversation, and you realize this kid was exceptional.
Yeah.
Right? His vision, his IQ and EQ was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it. And Horizons had invested in this, and they realized you've got a very smart kid with a great idea, some tech knowledge, etc. But how do you take this to the next level?
Right.
And so I guess the meeting was for me to see Nick and get excited, and for Nick to meet me. The funny thing about it is I sat there with Nick and just kind of, just gave him the direct, what I thought, the non-bullshit approach, and thought, right, he's going to go away and send him an email going, this guy's an arsehole, I never want to meet him again. He goes back and sends him an email and says, hey, I really like this guy. He's the only one who's kind of told me the truth so far of how tough this is going to be. Do you reckon he'll be one of my mentors? And that's how I got involved with Nick Delosio's company.
Wow. And what did you do to help him as you traveled around? Because I know that you met a lot of interesting people.
Yeah.
You told me a story one time about sort of bumping into Marissa Meyer and
So we were at DLD.
We were at DLD Munich in January a couple of years ago, and Nick was doing a talk there. And his mother was very worried that he was traveling on his own, being a 16-year-old kid. So one of my responsibilities was make sure he's not at all the tech after parties, getting drunk. He needs to be in bed. So we'd done the talks all day. I'm like, Nick, there's at all conferences, there's a bunch of VCs who are having parties and dinners. So we've got to go to like 3 different parties tonight. He's all right, I'm tag along. The first one was Wellington Partners, who are also Spotify investors. Then I think the next one was someone else. And then the third one was the Axel Partners, and Marissa was there. And I knew Marissa, I'd bumped into her a few times before, and I walked up and said, hi, Nick was in there. So meet Nick Delosio. And, that's how he got to know. That is by no means where the conversation for Sumly 18 months later even started, but at least there was an interaction. So I guess a lot of it is helping Nick hire some of the right people and not make some of the same mistakes everyone else along the way has made, growing too fast or outsourcing X, or when it came to the investment round that we did, I helped introduce Nick to a number of investors who invested in the company.
Yeah, so he had like an all-star list of investors, like Mark Pincus from Zynga, Joanne
To Ashton,
Shields,
to Troy
Ashton
Carter.
Yeah.
So some of those people I introduced him to.
Yeah. And did it matter to him that you had, in a way, had an experience where you were out on your own? Because he didn't leave school altogether. He was still studying, but he had one of those kind of star actor sort of deals, like kid actor deals, where he went to school.
I don't
but
think
not
that
really
was
the same way everyone
relevant
else.
because
Nick truly is exceptional. He has a conversation like a 45-year-old, right? So you're not dealing with a 16-year-old kid.
I'm 43, and actually I don't think I can have a conversation like that.
No, he is exceptional. I guess there were other things. One of the actual things is very similar to the Daniel Ek process, right? So because I'd gone through a certain amount of my time spending a lot of time with Daniel helping grow the company and go to the USA. So a lot of similarities there. I remember I took him to Stockholm to meet Daniel, and they hung out for an hour and in like one-on-one. And it was a great line Daniel said to him, which I'll never forget. When you're a 16-year-old kid and you're trying to build a company, a lot of people will go to you and you're a seasoned entrepreneur. You go, well, you're a kid. Let me explain to you. Daniel said to him, Nick, entrepreneur to entrepreneur. And I'll never forget that line because it takes a lot of balls by anyone to say to a 16-year-old that I'm regarding you as an equal. On the flip side, from Nick's aspect as well, he then realized I'm not being treated like a kid. And the tech world actually has this. Age really isn't that much of a barrier if you've got the talent.
The only thing you can really tease Nick for is being an Arsenal fan, in my view. But actually, after the FA Cup,
Yeah, I
I'm
think
not
they're
sure
all
he can
happy
really
this
get to
weekend.
that. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to CoinDesk. CoinDesk. You were the first person who told me about Bitcoin in a cafe not far from where we live, and I was interested because I've heard of most things. I think when it comes to tech, there's so much moving around on blogs these days, and it's pretty easy to pick things up. And that's what I say, quite often you'll tell me about things that I'm not aware of. What was it you saw in Bitcoin that made, in other kind of cryptocurrencies, that made you feel that there was a transformative opportunity there?
Well, you realize after you've been in the tech world for a certain amount of time, there's stuff that was taking place yesterday, there's stuff that's taking place today, but your risk appetite gets better, and then you start thinking, well, what's it going to be like in 5 years' time? So, if you take a prime example of financial services versus what we're living today, why is it that I can send you a text message, photo message, a video message, a voice message from my smartphone to your smartphone, it'll take you like 3 seconds, but you turn around to me and go, hey, Shaq, you owe me $12 for that pizza we shared last week. I'm like, well, you know what, let me go home, let me try and wire this money to you, and God forbid you happen to be in the USA, for me to send you that £12, they're going to charge me another £27 in transfer fee for you to get it. So you realize there's something very broken. Then you start looking into it, well, the financial systems are actually the same similar systems that they were using in the 70s and 80s. You take that. So yes, I'm a believer in Bitcoin, but I'm more a believer in digital currency or financial services being disrupted. And Bitcoin is the first thing that caught my eye that, okay, this may be the one. So part of it's like, I guess, you've been a fax machine salesman in the 90s or 80s, and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, faxes are going to be dead soon. What do you mean everyone uses faxes, all contracts? Well, check this thing out called email, right? You'd be blown away. Right. Imagine if you could now go back and have invested in the first email company. Yeah. Right? And if that's what your job was, to take big risks, and back people doing crazy stuff, you would have backed email. No?
But did you kind of hedge by launching CoinDesk as
so
opposed to actually betting big on currency?
I was actually with Nick, and we were in Hong Kong airport. We just sold.
So tell me what CoinDesk is first.
So CoinDesk is basically a media platform. Originally, it was an idea to have a blog which talked about Bitcoin. 12 months later, it's a team of 15 people discussing. It's all editorial driven, information driven, and price driven. So we've created the CoinDesk Bitcoin Price Index, which takes in all the prices, because there's such a wide gap between one exchange and another exchange, and we present our own price, kind of like the Dow Jones price on the stock market. But we're in Hong Kong, and the price had just shot up to, I believe, 260 from 30 or 60 or whatever. And I was getting continuous emails from people going, hey, should I buy Bitcoin? Should I sell Bitcoin, etc. I'm like, I don't know why you're asking me this, because you're far smarter than me. And then I realized there was nobody writing about it. There was nowhere you could go and understand about Bitcoin or digital currency in plain English. Mm-hmm. So I stayed awake on the plane all night, came back, called the team, and said, I have this idea. Why don't we hire one writer and launch this blog called CoinDesk? They're like, okay, but we've never done media. We don't really know. Is it one of your crazy ideas, or do you want us to do it? I'm like, you have 4 weeks to launch it. And we launched it 4 weeks, 8 hours, 22 minutes later. On 1st of May, and what we're in May now, and so it's just over 12 months old, and it's by far the leading source of information. And we've built a great brand, and I don't actually spend much time on it. I guess I'm the chief strategy officer and chairman and founder, but there's a whole team that runs it. And again, it's one of those which I didn't expect to be a business. It was just an idea.
What do you think about cryptocurrencies or these sorts of currencies? What is the future? Because obviously they've had a bit of a wild ride in terms of value over the last year.
Financial services are going to get changed. If I could predict the exact thing, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be busy investing in everything I had in those companies. But, it's just not about the actual Bitcoin. what else can the platform that's being created end up becoming? Mark Andreessen, who's far smarter and far better investor than me, has done a couple of great talks lately where he talks about where he sees this going. Chamath, who was one of the head guys at Facebook, he just did a talk, and there are 2 videos well worth talking about. So when you've got people way smarter than me, I'm nowhere as smart as them. I like to give them the platform, and then hey, sometimes I'm a bit too early, but it's interesting to be able to see that maybe I was thinking along the same lines a lot of other people.
Have you heard of the website What's Your Wearable Strategy?
No,
Do you have a wearable strategy? Because I've got a wearable right
absolutely.
now.
I have a wearable strategy. It's gone horribly wrong, but I invested in a company, and then we spent quite a bit of time on it, and you realize the devices that are out now probably aren't going to be the devices that go mass market in a few years. But hey, you take a risk, right? You take a risk, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong.
So 2 quick things before we go to questions. I mentioned the wearables. I thought that was like the shortest lived next big thing ever, because Nike, of course, sort of
stopped
let people go, who are designing the Nike Fuel Band, and said they're going to focus on software. It may just be that they're throwing themselves into whatever Apple is
software
next.
Yeah.
So how do you decide now that you have a lot more at stake? You are successful. What crazy idea you're going to put your money into and your energy into?
So there's a number of factors. The founder I've discussed, right? This passion, hunger, that's very critical, as is the founding team. The idea is very relevant. Like somebody comes to me and goes, hey, awesome founder going, let's open a coffee shop. It's pretty obvious how big that coffee shop can get on its own, unless you want to build a new generation, virtual coffee shop somewhere, and that's a very different scenario. But ultimately what you're doing is you're buying risk, right? So this is how I look at it. Here's an idea, here's the value, and let's use a number. The company is being valued at 5 million. They're trying to raise 100 grand or $1 million or whatever. I have to do a calculation to an extent in my head. Where can this go? Right? Can this be a $100 million company if all the pieces come in? Yeah? And well, okay, so I am buying risk at 5 to 100, right? 5%, and that's a risk I'm quite happy with, especially if I think I can help getting him from the 5 million to 100 million. The other part, which I guess is slightly different with me, is I don't have to invest. If you look at my personal investments, I'm not a fund. I don't have limited partners who are like, hey, we gave you $100 million. Why aren't you investing in the next Tinder or the next Snapchat, etc.? Like, well, I like some stuff and I'll invest in it. I like some stuff and, it may go horribly wrong. So I've got very different strategy. And my strategy, by the way, isn't proven yet, right? We may be talking in 2 years' time. You're like, hey, Shaq, you're a minicab driver in London. What happened? I went, well, it all went wrong. I'll be back. Right? I'll be back. So, hey, what I say, take it with a pinch of salt, right? Yeah. So, yes, there is this perceived success. Do I sit there going, hey, I made it? No, because the day I say that is the day I go back into depression. So there's always this hunger of going, well, I kind of got lucky, right? Like with Spotify, I don't actually feel I contributed too much. I'm just very grateful that Daniel X saw my craziness. And I go, okay, there's this crazy guy, doesn't know much about tech, wants to give me most of his net worth. Yeah, let's take the money. And allowed me to go and talk to crazy people like Sean Parker. So let's see what happens.
If Spotify were to have an IPO, how far away would that be?
I couldn't possibly comment on that.
Okay, one last question before we go to the audience. For people who are wanting to be part of a startup, right? Because there's just so much energy in London right now. What would your advice be? What's the best way to get involved with something that you think is exciting?
Startups come in different shapes and forms, and it's what you can contribute to that ecosystem or the team. I probably meet about 300 entrepreneurs a year, maybe more, maybe less, maybe 600, who knows, like a couple a day. And every entrepreneur, every founder, one of the biggest things is, I just can't hire the smartest people. I'm having problems hiring. Right? On the flip side, you meet amazingly sharp students who are like, I would love to work for a startup, but I can't even get a door in because I turn up and they're like, well, you don't have any experience, right? So we're going to take... So there's this divide which needs solving. And then combined with the best candidates I've seen at startups in an early stage, like, hey, you know what, I believe in what you're doing, I'm just going to turn up, and if you want me to clean the desks, I'll do that. I just want to learn this. You have to kind of unlearn everything that you did in a corporate environment to go and work in a startup. And, I will rephrase again regarding Will, who's not on his phone this time, who works with me. Will joined as a research assistant about a year ago, because, I get to meet all these amazing companies, and sometimes it's good for me to go, hey, Will, I'm meeting this company tomorrow. Get me everything that you can on them, right? So he'd give me this. He joined as a researcher in kind of a boutique consultancy. He probably does more startup work now than he expected, right? Yeah. Purely because he came on board and he's like, hey, well, check this out and check that, and this company's similar to that. So what I'm trying to get to is just saying I need to work in a startup is not the thing. Find really cool companies, find something you believe in, and then just reach out, right? Reach out. I mean, as an investor or an entrepreneur, I have so many ideas. If there were smart people, that, I would love to hire somebody who would go, I don't know what we're going to build, but there's all these crazy ideas. Why don't we spend 4 weeks on each project for the next 12 months? And out of those 12 projects, something good's going to come out of it. Right? So do I have the solution? No, but what I do know is every company is looking for smart people. Right? It's just how do you get there? And then the final touch I will say is, don't waste your time going to networking events, because they mean absolutely zero. Because I sit on the other side of companies and some guy walks in going, 15 students harassed me and they all gave me their details. Yeah, here's their new business cards I'm going to throw away. Right. Reach out to the founder. I've given jobs to people.
Not by fax.
By email. I've given a job to a guy, Mark Williamson, who then ended up running some of the special projects, now does the artist relations and label relations. And he reached out to me and said, hey, Shaq, sorry to trouble you. Appreciate you're a busy guy. Just looked at all the jobs at Spotify. I don't think I'm suitably qualified for any of them. But you know what? I really want to work and I'm willing to do anything. Is there any role that you think would be suitable? And I was like, you know what? I need somebody to help me get my shit done. If you want to come on board, I can't promise where this ends up, but it's a really cool role and it's a great entry point. And he joined, and like 6 months later, I'm like, hey, you run this. I've got no desire to run it, right? So it worked for him. It's worked for many other people.
Listen, I would want to say heartfelt thanks. That was truly inspiring and really wonderful to have you.